everybody? It's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. Alright, so yesterday we were talking about the Renaissance, and we're going to continue to talk about the Renaissance today, and then we're getting into some crazy stuff. Alright, so the Renaissance, as we talked about yesterday, means rebirth. The big thing to understand is that humans are now going to start relying on humans rather than faith in a higher power to take care of things. This idea of focusing on humans is called humanism, and trying to basically build up humans and learning from other humans, and by really focusing on what human potential is and what humans can accomplish, society is really going to grow from that point. So we're going to pick up today. Let me make myself a little smaller here. Boop. Put myself up here in the corner. Move that thing over there. All right. So, what we're going to start talking about today is a few other Renaissance people that really influenced the direction of society at the time. So, Petrarch and Boccaccio, we had talked about them yesterday, especially Petrarch. He's the most famous. He was the guy with the little green, the funny picture I had yesterday. So he is famous as the most famous humanist, one of the first ones that come out and really wrote about relying on human interaction, embracing what humans can do, which again is very different than the Middle Ages. And he's one of the most famous humanists that come out at the time. Machiavelli, Niccolo Machiavelli. All right. So this is let me move myself over a little bit here. This is Machiavelli. All right. Machiavelli writes a book called The Prince. All right. So in his book, basically what he says, and he's quoted all the time, this dude seems really harsh. All right. So people talk about Machiavelli like ruling with an iron fist. So Machiavelli himself wasn't a ruler, but what he did is he wrote a book about how to be a ruler and how to be an effective ruler. He doesn't write a book about how to be a liked ruler. He writes a book about how to get things done. So his book, The Prince, basically says if you're a leader and you have a choice of being loved or feared, choose fear every time if you have to choose. Now, it'd be great if you could have both of those, but you're probably only going to get one. You're either going to get love or you're going to get fear. Go with fear. You know why? Because if they love you, all of a sudden one day they can decide they don't love you, and they'll just walk away and ignore you, and there's no consequences from it. However, if they fear you, if they're afraid of you, they're never just going to turn around and ignore you because they're afraid of you. Now, will they like you? No. But will you be able to rule effectively if they fear you? Yes. And that's what Machiavelli says. So, people in history today still talk about things being very Machiavellian, very heavy-handed as leaders coming down with an iron fist. Machiavelli, he knows that, and he writes it in his book. There is a little a quote right here talking about Machiavelli. Put myself off the side here by Saul Alinsky. And it's a very true quote and it symbolizes that The Prince was written by Machiavelli for the haves on how to hold on to power. Rules for Radicals is written for have-nots on how to take it away. So people want to talk about Machiavelli and being a radical, like this is crazy talk, all the stuff he talks about, like ruling with an iron fist. It's not, and this, he makes a very good point about this, that it's not about taking power away. Machiavelli teaches people how to keep power. All right, so he's writing a book for existing rulers, not how to go take power from somebody else. So it is a little different than saying he's a radical, even though a lot of what he says is pretty intense, like camping. Intense, like camping. I know you're all laughing at home. We're going to move on. All right. So this is another famous person, one of the few very famous women that come out during the Renaissance. So this is Vittoria Colonna. All right. I know I'm butchering these names, and you just got to go with me on it. All right. So what she's famous for is Michelangelo, very, very famous, painted the Sistine Chapel, Statue of David, we talked about all that yesterday, very famous. She would write letters in the paper in the newspaper to Michelangelo, all right, about her thoughts and beliefs on things, all right? She's a very smart woman. Michelangelo would respond back to her. So they were basically pen pals, and they would bounce ideas off each other and debate popular stuff in society, but they did it publicly through the newspaper, all right? It's kind of sad to see how women were treated as a second-class citizen, and we're going to get into the Christian society today. We're going to talk about the Christian society at the time and different things of the Christian society. But in Christian society, they do have a tendency to subjugate women as far as from public view, historically, hundreds of years ago. So it's kind of interesting that the only way that she really becomes famous, and we know about her today, is because of her connection to Michelangelo. But because she was famous at the time, because of her connection to Michelangelo, we do have a whole bunch of information about her, and it's very interesting to see her connection to the outside world at the time. So she's probably one of the most famous women of the time period. So the question is, why did Machiavelli say that fear is more important than love as a leader? And what can happen if the people you control only love you? So we talked about that if you have an option between fear and love, he's going to choose fear. And explain to me, or explain here on the question, you can pause me if you need to, as we had talked about, why he would choose fear every time. All right, so the Northern Renaissance, so the Renaissance starts in Florence and it starts to spread, all right? So after the Black Death, it takes a while for the Renaissance to kind of move north, but it eventually does, all right? Because when everybody dies, more people are trying to figure out how to get life back together as opposed to, hey, let's create a whole new life. It really starts out as, hey, let's continue the life that we currently have. Johann Gutenberg invents something in 1455 going to fundamentally change society. He invents the printing press, all right? This is a picture of the printing press. So you may have heard about this in previous classes growing up. Johann Gutenberg and the printing press. If you haven't already memorized that, you need to, because they're always going to throw it at you that Johann Gutenberg invented the printing press. He did. He absolutely did. However, let me clarify the printing press a little bit. He does not invent the press, like this whole big thing about pressing things down. That he did not invent print. All right? People for a long time learned you can carve something on a piece of wood, paint it with ink, stamp it down really hard on something, and you can make a copy of it, and you can do it over and over and over and over and over and make a whole bunch of copies. That's not what he invented. What he invented is a collection of already made inventions to create this. It's the movable type. So what he figured out is he can carve individual letters, and he can slide them all onto a board, and he can have like a whole paper written, basically, and then make a stamp out of it. Then you take all the letters off and you put more letters on and stamp it again. The movable type, which wasn't even completely his idea, the movable type, the press, and the idea of printing, of mass producing it, he's the one who takes all those three already created ideas and puts them together, and he is rightfully credited with the printing press, which can mass produce papers. The moment you can mass produce papers like newspapers, what's going to happen is it speeds up communication around the world. All right, around the world, meaning in their known universe, in their cities and towns, I should say. It drastically speeds up communication, and people can learn from other people's ideas, and people can start building off of each other. So Johann Gutenberg, very famous for creating this, the printing press. The next thing is William Shakespeare's Globe Theater. William Shakespeare, wow, talk about famous. So William Shakespeare was crazy famous when he was alive. He's made a whole bunch of plays. Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, Midsummer Night's Dream. You may or may not have heard of those. Hopefully. If not, it's fine. So he made a whole bunch of plays. And he's very, very, very famous for it. Now, what's interesting about William Shakespeare is that whenever they reenact their plays today, and they're fantastic, in-depth stories that are really, really awesome, Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet, is that whenever you go see a Shakespeare play, they always talk in that weird, to be or not to be, that is the question, which is from Hamlet. Anyway, so the reason that is, they don't like translate them into modern English when we go hear them now. So it was originally in English, in Old English. The reason that is because every sentence in every single one of his plays is in poem fashion. By changing it, it completely takes away the intricacies of the language that he chose to write with. Shakespeare is crazy famous when he's alive. All right, he is so famous and is so good of just like putting out play after play after play. There is a large conspiracy theory over, did he actually write these? Because there's no way he has that many good plays that fast in succession like that. So there's a little bit of a conspiracy theory over, like, did he steal the plays? There's no hardcore evidence that I've been presented with that he did like take these from anybody. But when you're too successful, everybody's going to be a hater. He might just be a victim of that. But on top of all the cool plays that he made, the Globe Theater, these pictures right here, are one of the most advanced things that he did. All right, so everybody wanted to come see him, and he made himself really rich. So this is called his Globe Theater. This is a picture of it. This is kind of like a model of it. So what would happen is down here, all right, the poor people wanted to come see it, and the rich people wanted to come see the plays. However, the rich people didn't want to be around the poors, so what they would do is, or what Shakespeare did, is he designed this so the poor people and the rich people would be separate. And here's how he did it. If you want to come see a play, one of William Shakespeare's play, and you're a poor person, you can come down here, you can walk through the side here, and you're down here, it's standing room only. Cost you like a penny to get in. A really, really like itty bitty little bit of money. All right. So who's all down here? A whole bunch of poor people. Well, the rich people, they want to show up and watch this play too, but they don't want to be around, all the poors. So what he does is he charges them a ton of money, and they have another entrance, and they come in from the other side, and they stand up here. All right. And then even the richer people can stand up here, so they don't have to be with the not so rich people. And he jacks up the price on all the rich people. And the only reason the rich people are here instead of down here, which basically costs nothing, to see the same is because he knows rich people don't want to be with poor people. If the rich people wanted to just, save some money, they could pay a penny and come in here and watch it as well. But they don't. So not only is William Shakespeare, is he really famous at the time, he makes a ton of money because people come to watch his plays, and he found a way to milk it for everybody. So if you're a rich person, you can show up and watch the play. The same play poor people are watching, but you have a different entrance and exit, and you never have to be around them. You just have to pay a lot more money. And that's what makes the Globe Theater so famous, is he had figured that out on how to present his shows to the poor people and rich people simultaneously, and everybody is happy with it. So the question here, what fundamentally changed about communication when the printing press was created? What was the first book to be mass produced? Now, the first book to be mass produced is the greatest selling book of all time, the Bible. All right. So this is really, really interesting. All right. So I explained the first part of number 6, but I need to go ahead and start talking about the Bible here as we move into our next subject today. So the Bible is extremely expensive because people are doing it by hand for thousands of years. I would say thousands of years at this point, more than 1,000. So they've been doing it by hand. With the printing press, you can mass produce Bibles. This is what everybody wanted. All right. So once the printing press comes out, the Bible becomes much more widely available. And that's actually going to cause some issues that we're getting ready to talk about. So the first book to be mass produced is the Bible, but go through and explain to me what fundamentally changed with communication when the printing press was created that we had talked about. And you can always pause me. All right. The Reformation. All right. So you got to bear with me on this. All right. Why is it? Oh. Boop, 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 boop. All right. So, my voice broke. So, in Europe, all right, around 1500, all right, there is everybody, we'll just simplify it. Everybody's Christian, all right? The vast majority are. Now, if you're Christian, you go to church. So the church you go to is called the Catholic Church. So if you're Christian, you are Catholic. There's no other options. And the Pope is in charge of the Catholic Church. So you go to church, you're Catholic, all right? Well, once the printing press had mass-produced the Bible, more people started reading it, all right? So the way it had worked is the Bible is in Latin, all right? So most of the people in Europe can't read the Bible, all right? So how you learn what's in the Bible is you go to church, and the guys that work for the Catholic Church, the clergy is what they're called. They're parts of the church, your pastors, your preachers, and things like that. They will interpret it, because they can read Latin, and tell you what the Bible means and what you should do. So here's where it starts getting a little squirrely, though, all right? Once they mass produce the Bible, and the Bible becomes much cheaper, much more affordable because there's a lot more of them, a lot more people that can read Latin are able to get their hands on a Bible, because it was actually really rare to get your hands on a Bible. So when the Catholic Church had been doing some things that seemed weird to some people, but hey, they say this is normal, so we're going to go with it. Here's a picture of this dude, all right? This is Martin Luther, all right? So you're like, Martin Luther, I know that guy. Isn't that guy black? You might be thinking of Martin Luther King Jr., who in the 1950s, about 500 years later in the United States, is a huge leader of the civil rights movement in the United States. Making that connection isn't bad, because Martin Luther King Jr., the man who fought for African American rights in the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s in the United States, is actually named after this guy. All right. So Martin Luther, all right, is a monk, and he can read Latin. He gets a Bible. He reads the Bible, and he gets kind of irritated. Because he realizes that the Catholic Church has actually been doing a bunch of stuff that the Bible doesn't say it should do. The Catholic Church have been doing some shady things that completely actually goes against the Bible. All right. Not only does it go against the Bible, but like the church has been saying, nah, here's what the Bible says. The Bible says you need to do this, and the Bible clearly doesn't. All right, so there's a bunch of them. There's actually 95 of these things that the Catholic Church is doing that Martin Luther has a problem with. The most famous one, all right, and I'll give you an example, and there's like 95 of these, so this is just one of them, is indulgences. Here's what the Catholic Church had been doing. So the Catholic Church is extremely rich because you're like required to pay your tithes and stuff to the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church is really rich. You know what's better than being really rich? Being really, really rich. So the Catholic Church had done some stuff to make money that's pretty shady. Indulgences is one of them. Indulgences is this idea that if you die, all right, when you die, since the church knows everything about your family's finances, they know exactly how much money you have, all right, and it gets passed down to family members. So if the church knows you have a whole bunch of money and you die, the church will go to your family and say, hey, just got word from God upstairs. They're saying, your family member didn't make it to heaven. They're like, oh no, they went to hell? Well, they didn't go to hell either. They're in this place called purgatory, all right? And they're basically going to hang out there for about a week, all right? The only possible way that they can go from purgatory to heaven is if we, all the clergy, pray them out. All right. We spend all this time sending prayers for them. So obviously the family's like, oh, well, pray for them. Go do it. Get them to heaven. And they're like, really busy this week. I got a lot of things going on. Just don't think I'm going to have time. So you know what the family does? We will give you all this money if you will please pray them out. Guess what the church says? Okay, we're going to go pray real hard for them. Now, they claim, the Catholic Church, that all of this is clearly defined in the Bible, all right? Well, when people like Martin Luther read the Bible, they're like, wait a minute, I'm pretty sure the Catholic Church just made that entire thing up to make more money. That's shady. So he sees that situation and like 94 other situations. He has 95 reasons that he's mad at the Catholic Church once he has read the Bible and understand all the stuff that the Catholic Church is doing wrong. So this guy right here in his super cool haircut, I'm apparently naturally getting his haircut. Martin Luther goes and he nails this thing on the door of the churches or the printing press. He can mass produce it, but he goes to the number one church, nails this on the front door, and it's called his 95 Thesis. He is straight calling out the church and is like, this is wrong. This is not how Christianity works. This is not what the Bible says. So he basically stands up to the church and is like, this is wrong. Not only is this wrong, but you can go be a Christian and not be a Catholic. You can actually go to heaven and not have anything to do with the Catholic Church. You know who gets really upset about that? The Catholic Church. Because they're like, no. Because if people leave the Catholic Church, they're not paying the Catholic Church any more money. So the Catholic Church is like, no. And there's end up being a huge split. It's called a schism, all right, between the church, where you have the Catholics that, the people that stay in the Catholic Church. And then there's a whole group of Christians that break off and they go create different versions of Christianity. You're going to end up having all types of Lutherans and Calvinists are some of the first ones we're going to talk about today. But Presbyterian, Methodist, Baptist, any denomination, to Jehovah's Witness, any denomination today that would classify themselves as Christians but not Catholics are collectively referred to as Protestants. And that is a term the Catholics use. Protestants means protesting the Catholic Church. So the question here is, Martin Luther had an extremely critical view of the Catholic Church. How had the printing press helped motivate a rebellion by some Christians against the Catholic Church? All right. So we had sat here and been discussing that. So pause me and answer that in complete sentences. So this leads to Protestantism. All right. Being a Protestant. So if you leave the Catholic Church, but you still say you're a Christian, but you're not Catholic, you are then Protestant. Doesn't matter, and that's still the case to present day. So if you go to church and you're in a religion that is a follower of Jesus, but you are not Catholic, you are Protestant. Even if you're Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterian, Jehovah's Witness, Seventh-day Adventist, any denomination of Christianity that is not Catholic is called Protestant, because the term comes from protesting the Catholic Church. And it's called the Great Schism, the Great Split between the Catholic Church and the Protestants. All right. So a lot of people left the Catholic Church and joined other versions of Christianity. Anybody against the Catholic Church is called a Protestant. All right. So here's a little cheat sheet on the differences of it. So Catholics headed under one supreme head, the Pope. Protestants don't have one leader because Protestant churches are all kind of independent. So there's a whole bunch of small collection of Protestant churches, whereas the Catholic Church is still one cohesive unit. And so Catholics have the Pope. There is a clear hierarchy, clear doctrine, clear set of rules for Catholics. Protestants their rules drastically change based on the denomination. The Catholics do not allow their clergy to get married. So like priests in the Catholic Church, still to this day, unless that has changed, and I'm unaware of it, are not allowed to be married. And Protestants, like Martin Luther's like, that doesn't say that anywhere in the Bible. That was at least not his interpretation. Say pastors can marry and have families. So there is clear-cut differences between the Catholic Church and the Protestants, even present day. The question here is, what is the difference in Protestant and Catholic, and are they both Christians? So we've talked about that in pretty good detail here. So pause me and go get complete sentences on that. All right, so Calvinism and Lutheranism, all right? So this is John Calvin, and this is John. Well, let me explain that. So Calvinism, all right, and Lutheranism, all right. So here's the big difference, or here's what they are. So Calvinism, all right, led by John Calvin, all right. He has this idea of predetermination, all right. John Calvin has his idea of predetermination. Here's what that means, and it's kind of unique. So Lutheranism, let me start with this simple one. Lutheranism is very similar to any denomination of Christianity that you would see today that's not Catholic. So much more relaxed in the strict doctrine. Lutherans do have very strict doctrines. They follow more closely to the Catholics than the other ones. But Lutherans still around today. Calvinism is a little different because this is the first version that's a little unique. So Calvinism is a Protestant religion, Christian religion, that believes in predestination. So they believe no matter what happens in your life, God already knows when you're born whether or not you're going to go to heaven. So if you go out and you're a saint, or if you come out and you're a serial killer, doesn't matter. Whether you go to heaven or not is already predetermined. So Calvinists really surprise a lot of people with this mentality, and it's unique because in the Middle Ages, structure was a huge part of consistency and structure. Everything has to work at the same place. Calvinists, when you have a whole religion who it doesn't really matter how they act in their own life for their afterlife, people really look at Calvinists as unpredictable. You don't know what they're going to do because they're not held by any specific doctrine, because it doesn't necessarily matter to the individuals in the congregation. So John Calvin is, and Calvinist is a little unique with the idea of predestination. So the question here is, Calvinism's concept of predestination is different than most other Christian teachings. How could this influence society? And we had just gotten done talking about that, so you can pause me, answer this in complete sentences, and we're going to move on. All right, the Catholic Reformation. Tons of people leave the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church goes into panic mode. They're like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And so the Catholic Church gets together, and the Pope's like calls all the heads of the Catholic Church, like, hey, we got to get together and talk about this. And they all like go and lock themselves together over the course of 25 years. So it wasn't like a one-day thing. And they're like, all right, let's really look at what has caused so many people to leave the Catholic Church. So they kind of locked themselves in rooms for 25 years. Figuratively, not like consistently. They had a bunch of meetings. So I'm guessing people like Martin Luther are like, man, that's really awesome. That they're going to sit here, reflect upon their own mistakes. They're going to see what they have done wrong. They're going to fix it. That's great for everybody. Wonderful. Well, after 25 years of meeting, the Catholic Church comes out. All right. And I imagine the Protestants are like, all right, let's hear about how wrong you are. And is at the Council of Trent. And they're like, yeah, so we took a good hard look at this. We're not wrong. Y'all are. You're all going to hell for not being Catholics. And they're like, what? And they're like, yeah, so we have done absolutely nothing wrong. Everything we said is correct. You guys are the problem. And certain countries who committed wholeheartedly to Catholic made it illegal to be a Protestant. All right? And this is where he starts getting weird. So Spain, about 90% of Spain had remained Catholic. They make it a law. You have to be Catholic. Like, you don't have a choice. You have to be Catholic. And there are people like, I'm not going to be Catholic. You know what happens to you in Spain if you decided to not be Catholic, if you want to be a Protestant? It's called the Spanish Inquisition. They tortured you to death for not being Christian enough. That's right. They literally tortured you to death until you admitted that, oh yeah, the Protestant is wrong and Catholic is right. There were other countries you could get in trouble for being a Catholic. All right? And you had to be Protestant and not Catholic. It got really weird and got really confusing. And like, so the Christian religion like starts like turning on itself between Protestants and Catholics. And there's a lot of tension in Europe at the point. Spain here with the Inquisition used torture. Is the most famous one. These are just some of the horrible torture stuff they would do. And like rip people's bodies apart and other stuff. And like, you're going to be Catholic. And like, no, I'm not. And then just like rip you apart. It's absolutely horrifying. And this happens in like, at the time, modern Christian societies. And you're like, I don't know if this is exactly, since everybody here claims to be a follower of Jesus, don't know if these are very Jesus-like machines or way of doing things. But, you know, as is the case sometimes in religion, that the religions themselves, the churches, can veer off course from the actual teachings of what they're trying to teach. And I think the Spanish Inquisition is probably a pretty good example of that. But yeah, so this is one of the more extreme versions, is in Spain in the middle centuries, or about 1600s, of the Spanish Inquisition, where they are literally murdering people for being Protestant. So the question here is, how did the Council of Trent and the Inquisition both attempt to strengthen the Catholic Church and limit Protestant Reformation? So we had just gotten to talking about the Council of Trent and the Catholic Church. So go through and explain that in complete sentences. And when you do that, we are done with today's lesson. I will see you guys tomorrow.